Welcome to Purposely Catholic. This program is a critical part of how we assist parents with children in living up to their call to be the primary catechists and teachers of the faith in their homes. Over the course of our time together, we'll hear from Father Len McMillan as we discuss matters of the faith central to every Catholic family. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, my name is Father Len McMillan. I am the pastor here at St. Pius in beautiful Coeur d'Alene, and this is Purposely Catholic. And this week we're discussing the Beatitudes, really the first four Beatitudes. Now, just for parents, there are Beatitudes in Luke and Matthew. We're really going to be covering Matthew's Beatitudes. Luke's are a little bit different. Matthew, I love the one of Matthew. Most people know the Matthean ones. And so we're really just going to do Matthew. So the Beatitudes, first of all, I know this sounds kind of strange. I'm going to hit this again. Matthew's gospel is very Jewish. So the Jews think about community, community, community. And the Beatitudes are Jesus describing how heaven works. And at the end, and to me this is kind of important, Jesus, those who hear my words and put them into action are like the man who builds his house on rock. Except when he says house, house means in Judaism a whole system. It can mean an architectural house, but if you say the house of Israel, it's not one architectural house. It means the way the whole country works. Or when it says that James and John leave their father in their the boat, and they left the house of their father. Really, the whole way their culture seemed to work. So the house is the way a culture or a nation or a church works. And what Jesus is doing in the Beatitudes is saying, oh, this is how the kingdom of heaven works. So the kingdom of heaven, this is how heaven works. Now, this sounds kind of strange, and I love this in the Bible. Most people in the Bible skip over this part of the Old Testament, that in the Old Testament, God gives tons of chapters on how to worship. Most people just skip that and say, oh, we'll just get guitars out. God in the Old Testament gives tons of chapters on how to build the temple, how to worship, tons of chapter on how to build the temple. And then after that, and this sounds really strange, he gives tons of chapters on how the nation is supposed to work. And some of these laws, especially with me and my sense of humor, I love to joke about them. Like they get really particular on how to do certain things. And it's not about the doing of certain things. It's about creating a culture or system that's just. So like, yes, you have to feed the poor who can't feed themselves. But more importantly, create a nation that allows the poor to escape poverty. That's what all those laws are about. So it outlines a whole new how a society should work together. Believe it or not, the Beatitudes, they outline how a whole society should work. Because this is how heaven works. Heaven works this way. So if you want to live in the house of God in heaven, then make sure you're building the house here. And the Beatitudes is how it works. So the Beatitudes, it's really for a whole society, a whole church. It's not for your personal development. So what Matthew is doing is contrasting. This is how heaven works versus how the Roman Empire works. If you want to be part of heaven, learn how it works now. So that's why he keeps repeating kingdom of heaven. He doesn't say heaven, and he doesn't say kingdom of God, because for Matthew, being very Jewish, heaven is God, and heaven is community with a whole lot of other places. And so the Beatitudes describe not just the personality of God, it's supposed to describe the personality of heaven, and it's supposed to describe the personality of the church. So that's why Matthew writes in the plural. And heaven works the opposite of the empire. The empire and our culture will say, blessed are the rich who take more than they need. Blessed are those who never feel any pain. We'll give you painkillers. Blessed are the powerful, because they'll rule the country. The Beatitudes are the complete opposite. And so I heard this one translation of the Beatitudes. When it says, blessed are you, it could be translated, blessed are you when you're in the right place, when you stand with the right type of people. And notice, Christ doesn't say, oh, blessed are the poor, they will receive something. No, Christ says, blessed are the poor in spirit now. You get the blessings now. So the question is, well, what's a blessing? If the Beatitudes means blessings, that's what Beatitude means. What exactly is a blessing? A blessing is anything that helps you return back to paradise. The Garden of Eden was a source of blessing. So anything that's a blessing prepares you for the true promised land, heaven. It brings about shalom, peace, unity. So I know a lot of people like to translate the Beatitudes are happy are those who actually, it could be translated happy, but unfortunately, it could only be translated happy when you mean what makes God happy. Unfortunately, happy in the American sense is confused with pleasure. And as the ancient Greeks, as modern psychologists have found, pleasure does not lead to happiness. So, like the ancient Greeks, Socrates, Aristotle, pleasure just does not lead to happiness. What leads to happiness is what the Greek word eudaimonia, like EU, like Eucharist, means good soul. So the Beatitudes really describe a blessedness that gets ready for heaven. And so the first four, and as the first is, blessed are the poor in spirit. It's not blessed are the poor. Actually, the Gospel of Matthew will say that. But blessed are the poor in spirit. So ask your kid, what does it mean to be blessed, poor in spirit? It means to be not greedy. That money and things and wealth, they'll never fulfill you. And once you learn that, you can actually become happy. People who think, well, I'll be happy if I just gain $1 billion. There's always another billion to gain. And so the poor in spirit, it's not about how much money you have or how much money you don't have. The poor in spirit, what they really want is God. Things and wealth won't make them happy. They learn that little bit of wisdom. They're like the woman with the alabaster jar, has this perfume oil. That's everything she owns. She pours it out on Christ. She pours out everything because more stuff won't make her happy. And so the poor in spirit, they kind of aware of their dependency on really God. They don't look for things to make them happy. That's a real blessing in life. Like this sounds kind of strange. It's not blessed are the poor because I've worked in many places. I've worked with the poor. And the poor can also be incredibly greedy. They just don't have any money. They can be just as rapacious as the super wealthy. And I've met some super wealthy people who are truly poor in spirit. Yeah, they have a lot of money, but money does not control them. So poor in spirit, they can be successful and accomplished, but they never let their success blind them. They're not easily seduced into some fan club because the propaganda that they have money. That's poor in spirit. And unfortunately, the United States, like the Roman Empire, works for it. I'll tell parents this horrible story about myself. Sometimes if I make reservations, the world is kind of anti-religious. So if I make reservations, I don't say Father Len McMillan. I say Dr. McMillan. And I was out to dinner with friends, and it said, Dr. McMillan. I said, oh, here I am. They said, why do you do that? And I said, because we'll get better service. We'll get seated quicker. And I know it's a slight deception, but it's their deception to think that, oh, if I'm a doctor, I deserve better treatment. Those are the ones who give better treatment because you think I'm a doctor or I might have money. That's the opposite of the poor in spirit. The poor in spirit realize their sole possession really wants to be God, not things or position or title. Now, your kids are going to be sold in marketing that you need this to be happy. They've actually done this interesting study on people who watch a lot of commercials, have less chance of being happy because you're constantly thinking, oh, I need to have the beach body, or I need this, or I need this ab machine, or I need this car to finally be happy. Maybe my kids will finally love me if I get this. That's all the marketing is. And I just think it messes up your head. So the poor in spirit, they're not seduced by it. And once I had this parishioner, amazing woman. She was from Korea, and she had no family, and she had a job, but she took a second job as a cashier at one of the stores, just part-time. And everything she earned from that job as a cashier went to pay for this orphanage. And I asked her once why, and she says, because I was an orphan myself and came to the United States, and I know what it's like to be unloved. And she did have a little bit of money. She had a decent job, but wow, she paid pretty much for all these meals of this other orphanage with her part-time job. That's somebody who, I know this sounds kind of strange, poor in spirit. She wasn't working an extra job so that she could have more stuff. She was working an extra job because she wanted to give love away. Stuff didn't make her happy. Love made her happy. I admire that. The second beatitude are, blessed are those who mourn. That's a really odd one. Mourning means to be sad. So describe to your kids, no, believe it or not, there's a great blessing in sadness. Start with, you could use the story of the prodigal son. The prodigal son, life turns around, not when he loses everything, but when he feels the sadness, when he mourns and realizes what he lost. That mourning is a good thing. Once he realized, wow, I really lost my father and everything, that sadness moved him to return to his father. That's why Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn. Mourning, it wakes us up. That sadness of sin woke him up to return to God. Our sadness of sin can return us to God. The opposite of that, of a younger son who mourns his own sins, is the older brother. Who's the older brother in the story, he obeyed all the rules, but he can't mourn the loss of his younger brother. So in this odd twist, the younger son who mourns his sins is welcomed back into the father's house. The older brother he's obeyed all the moral rules and regulations, but he can't mourn the loss of his brother. He's the one who's outside the father's house, and the father's house is heaven. And so there is this blessedness that mourning teaches us something. The depth of our mourning also shows the depth of our love. To never have mourned, to have pain, is to never have loved. And that's a worthless life. I once know this guy went down to South America when I was down there and saw poverty. And all he could say is, thank God it's not me. So finally I said to him, I got a question every time you say, well, thank God you don't live like this. You're not moved the fact that your brothers and sisters, part of the body of Christ, lives like this? I mean, you have no sadness. All you have is this kind of selfish thought of, well, glad that's not me. That's actually kind of strange. And then they did this study among sociopaths. Sociopaths can't feel pain. So punishing sociopaths won't do any good. They can't feel pain. Sociopaths can't mourn. So after a while, your ability to mourn sociopaths aren't born. They're grown. They're developed. You want to teach your kids the blessedness of mourning. Even Christ, when he looks at the crowd, the lost crowd, there's a Greek word that's used. In English, he'll say he was struck to the heart. But really, it's this Greek word that means your gut falls out. Whenever you see somebody else in pain, your gut just wrenches up. That's what Christ feels. That's what God feels when humanity is lost and broken. Not anger or disgust at us, but splagchnizomai. It's this mourning, this pain. If I see other people in pain, I feel pain. There's a blessedness there. It increases our love. And the last part, this sounds kind of strange. This won't be the last part. There's this interesting study that there's a difference between sadness and depression. And I know I've talked about this, but that's why I think one should be very careful not to go to your psychologist about sadness, because they'll interpret depression and sadness as the same thing. Depression, you have no energy for anything. Everything's dark and gray. Sadness is not depression. So Malcolm Gladwell noticed this interesting thing when he was studying all the lives of these great people that he admired, that they all had some great sadness, loss of a mother or father in childhood. And he noticed that they actually excelled. And they did this interesting study of children who have lost a parent. Many times that sadness actually makes them more creative, more compassionate to other people. Sadness is, in one sense, a superpower. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not painful, but sadness really wakes people up to just how precious life is, makes them notice things, makes them care better. There's a blessedness there. Or there's a story about this doctor who removed a malignant tumor from the 13-year-old boy. It was in the news, and to prevent the cancer from returning, they gave him chemotherapy, which of course made the 13-year-old kid go bald. And so 13 of his kids, of his friends, they all shaved his head. And when the teacher saw it, he shaved his head. I mean, how sensitive am I to the needs of those who are hurting? If you are sensitive, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Or I like this mystic said, you may call God love or goodness, but the best name for God is compassion. And if you have compassion, you feel other people suffering. You know they're suffering. So for parents, talk about the blessedness of actually feeling other people's pain, or the gratitude of somebody who's felt your pain and came to your aid. We want to be those people who we can feel what other people feel. Blessed are those. The third one is blessed is a meek. And I love this one. But the problem is the word meek, we got from a German word that means soft. But that's a terrible translation. Because when you think of meek, what's your first image? That meekness is a kind of weakness. That's the very opposite of what meekness means. Meekness, praos, in Greek, technically it's the opposite of violent. But meekness deals with this image of power. So just the opposite of meekness is I have no desire for power. It's not powerlessness. It's no desire for power. It's actually type of control. What they found out is that powerlessness is really, really bad for people. Higher heart attacks, cancer, etc. Being powerless, feeling like a victim is really terrible for you. But they found the opposite too. This need for power to control other people is also malignant to your health. And so between these two extremes, powerlessness and seeking power, there's meekness, which means I don't desire power, nor am I affected by powerlessness. The priests in the temple, when they describe how much they hate Jesus because they saw Jesus as a threat to their power. But yet it describes Christ as meek. Christ is not needing desire for power, nor is he affected by powerlessness. So the meek inherit the land. Now, I like that because in the Old Testament, God warns the people, before you enter the promised land, you'll start to think that you did it all, that you earned all this. And if they lose their meekness, thinking, well, I did it all, you'll lose the land. And, the ones who have all the power, they think that they're going to inherit all the land and control everything, but they lose everything. Or I know this Irish priest he was the first of the family to make it to the United States and had a good life. And at Mass once, in the middle of the Eucharist, he was thinking how lucky he was that he was able to escape poverty and come to the United States. And suddenly at Mass, he heard his mother's voice, who had died. He heard his mother's voice clearly say to him, "You didn't make it alone." And I like that. So he was this really holy priest. And so suddenly he realized, oh, I've lost my meekness. I didn't come here alone. I came here with other people. That's why those who are bent on power, thinking they did it alone, they lose the land. The meek inherit the land. And this priest was asked to arbitrate between these two arguing priests who with opposing views. And both priests were trying to manipulate the other to win the argument for the right outcome. So this Irish priest came and he had to arbitrate. And he said he did agree with one side, but he wouldn't help because they were both trying to manipulate and control the other person. So he said, you may be right, but the problem is, like the Irish priest, if you lack meekness, even with the right opinion, you'll misuse it for the purpose of Satan. So everything will become about power. A lot of people think that they're moral because in their position they've done the right thing, but they lack meekness. An example of great meekness I like is Solanus Casey, this priest from the Midwest. He was known to be incredibly meek, and there's a story of this one guy yelling at him, and Solanus Casey refused to get angry. He wouldn't react. Anger is when you lack the control of meekness. And so Solanus Casey, he couldn't be intimidated. A meek person can't be intimidated by anger, won't overreact. So Jesus, of course, says is meek. And that's a form of power. I am meek and humble of heart. Now, getting back to the meaning of meek, and I like this. Meekness is the virtue of calm strength. And that sounds kind of strange. But meekness does not mean weakness. It's just the opposite. The word meek comes from this Greek word, praos, which also describes strength under control. And it's actually used to describe how a war horse is. So what a war horse is, take a horse, a wild stallion. They're brought in from the mountains. They're broken. Some are trained to pull wagons or race, but the best of them were trained as war horses. And they were trained to be the most fear and courageous, where they have to head straight into battle, gunfire and everything, and they will not stop. That's meekness. I am not intimidated by other people's shows of power. That's why meekness is known with the strength of a war horse, not frightened by arrows or anything, nor is there any sense of feeling like a victim. So meekness is like a war horse. It's power under authority. It's strength under authority. Not predatory, but strong. I'm not given in to other people's intimidation. So, blessed are the meek. The last one is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. But then you get this question of, well, what is righteousness? Righteousness is a little hard to define. What it means is right relationship, that I'm in right relationship between me and you, me and God, and even myself, that I'm in right relationship. Now, unfortunately, when people say the word righteous, they often think it means some sort of private moral quality. Righteousness is a lot more than that. Righteousness means that you're willing to be disadvantaged for those living in community. The unrighteous will take advantage of others so that they get something. They don't have to lie and cheat. So, like the Pharisees are very concerned about moral rules of right and wrong, but they always take advantage of other people. And I don't know if parents can describe this, but there's this great author, Hannah Arendt. And Hannah Arendt was Jewish in World War II. And after World War II, when suddenly I'm forgetting the name, this German Nazi, who's the German Nazi who was in charge of all the death camps? Suddenly blanking out of his name. Anyhow, he was... she went to go see the interview, and he was really this buttoned-down, prim and proper vacuum clean salesman. And that's what he was before the war. And they put him in charge of killing millions of people. And she thought he'd be like this guy dressed in black leather and, angry and vicious and bitter. Actually, he was prim and proper. He wasn't known to cuss, never got a speeding ticket, never put a toe out of line his entire life, but had no problem killing millions of people. Because, as his defense was, well, the law passed it, I was just very good at getting it. So Hannah calls this the banality of evil, where evil sometimes looks like a prim and proper vacuum cleaner salesman, never cussing, never doing anything wrong, but never in right relationship with anyone, will take advantage of anyone. And so Proverbs says that the righteous man withholds nothing from others. And I like that. The righteous, they live in this constant awareness of an obligation to a community. The unrighteous, they don't take care of the poor. They don't take care of their elderly neighbors. They never pitch in and help. They don't live in right relationships. They may obey the speeding ticket and may never cuss. But the unrighteous, they never really give their gifts away. So Southern slave owners might have been very religious, but they weren't righteous. They weren't really concerned about other people. In Germany, there are many people who are not Nazis. They didn't hate Jews or Catholics that were sent to the concentration camp, but they also never offered any help. That is unrighteous. And so, to be honest, righteousness and justice often gets translated as the same thing, because in Matthew, 7 times he mentions justice in the Sermon of the Mount. 7 always means the number for commitment, the covenant. But technically the word is righteous. But righteous could be translated as justice because there's this biblical idea that righteousness creates justice. Righteousness is better than moral legalism. Moral legalisms don't work. So St. Paul says you can either choose the way of basically legalism or the way of Christ, which is righteousness. Righteousness, it can't be achieved through laws. In fact, this canon lawyer, I like this, was one canon lawyer said, every time you read a canon in the Catholic Church is because behind each canon is a fool. Somebody did something stupid, and so now we have to create a rule. But rules don't create justice. Righteousness does. That I want to be in right relationship with other people, so I'm not going to cheat them. So the letter of James says the same thing. But notice it doesn't mention just righteousness. It says hunger and thirst for righteousness, which means I want to become better and better and better. I'm not satisfied. I want to be better and better and better. So it's hunger and thirst for righteousness. Not blessed are the righteous. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for more and more. I like hunger and thirst because in my mind, it reminds me of the Eucharist. Eucharist, we come back weekly to feed on the body and blood of Christ so that we can see each other as brothers and sisters. We become more righteous to each other the more we see our connection to others. So I like the hunger and thirst. Now remember, in all four of these, all 8 Beatitudes, the remarkable fact is that in the Sermon on the Mount, not one single time does Jesus say, blessed are those who believe. He says, blessed are those who do. It's an action. And so really, parents, for the first 4 Beatitudes, I know this sounds kind of strange, say a Hail Mary for each Beatitude. I actually say a Hail Mary for all the Beatitudes every day to grow more and more in it. So anyhow, good luck. God bless you, parents. Thank you for your service.